It's It's easier to put out the shadows than it is to lighten the highlights. That's all makes Batman is no around about that. It's all that's easy. Batman is never used. That is only if you want
I'll ride them out. I know at the bike shed, you know, I like to push up a few batteries at the front.
Yeah, but Warren, the organizer of the rest, that's always shit on it. The 2 1.